Okay, I'm setting up. Well, thank you, Sang Mook, and for all those folks there. As Sang Mook says, morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're everywhere. And I really want to thank Sang Mook for giving me an opportunity to put this talk together, because it's many of the ideas have been in my mind, but I haven't had a chance in a number of years to put them, organize them with newer data that's coming along on the ages of the bend, on the ages of new subduction zones in the Western Pacific, and so on. And I'm not sure I have all the answers, but I will talk about one part of the back arc system on the rim of the Pacific, at any rate, that doesn't seem to fit what we both, all of us know, understanding is how the most of the Western Pacific arc systems that Dan Carrig described so well and has been tested very well too. So anyway, my first slide, which you can see up there on top, and I hope you can see this with my arrow. I hope that works okay for everybody. At any rate, you know, we have mid-ocean ridges, but we also have where the subduction takes place. A lot of moisture gets into the mantle wedge, and we also have arc volcanic ridges. So I'd like to talk about the arc volcanic ridges specifically with respect to the Illusion system, which I just describe as atypical in comparison to what we normally find. Let's see if I can get this right now. So, did the slide change, Samuel? Okay.
Yes, it did.
Okay, yeah. Good. All right. So I call this the atypical origin and evolution of the Illusion arc, and it's back arc Illusion Basin up in the Bering Sea. And what this slide shows is up here in red is the Bering Sea, the Illusion Basin here, the Illusion arc. But we're more familiar all the way on down across the Western Pacific, all the way on down to the Tonga-Laos system at any rate, with especially the work of Dan Carrig back in the 70s in the Philippine Sea, the Eastern Philippine Sea, and also down through here, as to how these back arc and arc systems evolve. And so I'm going to try to see if I can get to the next one here. Did that work? Yeah. What the typical back arc basin system of the Pacific Rim really forms, and this is Dan's work, of far arc rifting of an arc system that initiates a back arc spreading center, a ridge and spreading center, and so on. And the information on that, the drilling on that, the testing on that is really very, very sound and very solid. And Dan did his initial work down here in the Eastern Philippine Sea, and he drew this cross section. I'm going to show it to you next, A, B, C, D. And he was looking at, this was back in the 1970s, evidence of what he saw were arcs splitting apart, spreading in between them, getting a back arc, or what he called remnant arc systems. If I can go to the next one. Okay. So here's Dan. He's still a good friend of mine. We I have to admit, we don't agree at all on the Illusion system, but that doesn't shape in any way our friendship. We've been around each other a long, long time. But at any rate, A to B to C to D. This is in the Western Philippine Sea, which is a little different animal than what we're going to be talking about. But the remnant arcs is split apart here on the Palau-Kyushu Ridge, back arc spreading to form this basin. The West Mariana Ridge split apart to the Mariana Trough all the way out to the trench. So this is what Dan really had to work on. I wanted to show his original stuff back in the 1970s, but he figured it out, that there was back arc spreading, new crust was being created back here, not old crust, but new crust with respect to this whole system that was operating here. And he published not only here, but also down in the Lao Fiji Basin area. A lot of us are familiar with that. So here's the IBM system up here, Palau-Kyushu, Remnant Arc, spreading Forest of Elevators, and also the Shikoku Basin up to the north, spreading back in through here, West Mariana Ridge, a remnant arc, back arc spreading, Mariana Trough, out here to the volcanically active Mariana Ridge. So this was the way things were working here in the Western Pacific. And also down here, you can see the same sort of pattern. And all of this made a whole lot of sense. And I'd say it's been drilled and talked about an awful lot. And basically Dan's ideas are perfectly sound and they're just fine. But I want to compare now this back arc basin system of the IBM Eastern Philippine Sea and the what I'm calling atypical Illusion Bering Sea region up in through here. Because when back in the 1970s, and Dan and I were talking first about this, we were just beginning to get into the Bering Sea, and some of the initial work there was done by scripts by George Shore, later on by Doc Ewing, and things were not exactly geomorphologically, and later on we learned magnetically, at any rate in terms of stripes, the same as what we were seeing along the Western Pacific. So kind of the question is, what's going on here? Do we understand it? Are we getting the right kind of information? So I'd like to show the tectonic setting of the Illusion Bering Sea region, the present setting. Pacific plate under thrust the Aleutian Trench here, Aleutian Ridge, and way over here on the eastern side of Alaska, about 45 kilometers per million years, but all the way over here on the Kamchatka side, almost twice that at 80 kilometers per million years. Very oblique under thrusting as we go this way. So here's the back arc basin, the Illusion Basin. Here's the Bering Shelf. And this is the way things are set up now. Our best information, and I'll show you that the Illusion Ridge, the oldest rocks that we have from there that have been dredged by the Geomar folks in Kiel, at any rate, is around 48 million years ago, 48 MA. We'll get to that in a second here. Here's an old diagram. In the old days, and I do mean the old days, 1973 here by Taro Alpha. In order to get a visualization of what the Bering Sea looked like, we had to draw it. We did not have Google Earth. The back arc Bering Sea basin, it seemed to us back here, differed from the back arc basins, typical of the Western Pacific, in that the Bering lacked arc paralleling remnant arc. Here is the Eastern Philippine Sea, Palau here, West Mariana, and you can see roughly parallel the trench system out there here. These are the remnant arcs. This is the back arc spreading that produced them. When we looked at the Bering Sea, we had Bowers Ridge, Shearshoff Ridge. Now, these are submerged ridges. They do not come up to the surface, but they weren't parallel to the Aleutian arc. They were quite different. And we had no idea at that time what Bowers Ridge was all about, what it was constructed of. Less even so back then of Shearshoff Ridge. This was back in the days of the Soviet Union, and getting information in from the Bering Sea was difficult because of the language problems and publications. But we had two ridges back here, Shearshoff and Bowers, and they did not appear at all to look like remnant arc systems. So it's kind of like, so what's happening here? What's going on? However, work that we were doing up there, we did find a ridge across the Bering Sea, the deep part of the Bering Sea Illusion Basin called Vitus Arch, that Al Cooper named that. It was a shallower part. Line 44 cuts right through here. There's line 44. And this was Vitus Arch, but it was also at kind of right angles to the Aleutian Ridge, at least out through here. But all of this, based upon the refraction work we were doing, that George Shore was doing, others were doing, indicated this was oceanic crust. This was not arc crust. This was not a remnant arc system. So we just could not could not find at any rate evidence of these remnant arcs of a whole system that was migrating seaward. That's where we were. Looking closely at the Vitus, at any rate, right through here. Here is the oceanic crust here. It's an unknown age. We've tried to date that. We have not been successful with that. It has been buried through sediment. The Vitus Arch seems to be a buried structural system, oceanic basement. There are high seamounts. Some of them come within about a kilometer of the seafloor, but everything seems to be buried. It seems to be all oceanic crust of unknown age, but nothing in here looked like a remnant arc. So what's going on? Something else that came up at later. At the Western Pacific back arcs, the regional trend of spreading anomalies were parallel or subparallel to the frontal or active volcanic arc. Anomalies were commonly laterally irregular and discontinuous. So here is the East Sea of Japan. Anomalies such as they are roughly parallel to the Japan continental crust. Here in the East Philippine Sea, anomalies in through here, roughly parallel. Lao Basin, roughly parallel, but irregular and irregular. So what there was in magnetic anomalies that had formed in the back arc at any rate were sort of irregular, discontinuous, not very terribly very bold. So at the same time, what was going on up in 1976 up in the Bering Sea, early geophysical studies of the Bering Sea Basin, we recorded a pattern of prominent high amplitude arc normal north-south trending magnetic anomalies. This is a cartoon showing them right through here. I have to tell you that when we were first up here, we were normally coming into Dutch Harbor, fueling and going up into the Bering Shelf. And for a number of years, we were going parallel to these anomalies and did not see them. It was anti-submarine warfare, ships going back and forth across that picked up the anomaly pattern. Al Cooper in 1976 thought he could identify some M-series anomalies in the Bering Sea. He later changed his mind and says, no, I don't think you can, once we got a lot more data. But the pattern, the north-south pattern, very bold anomalies, very morb looking sort of anomalies at any rate, were there, and they didn't go away. New data, it's now being prepared for publication by Dan Shire of USGS, using all available marine data that he could get his hands on. The anomalies are similar to those generated at mid-ocean spreading ridges. They're very bold, and I remind you, this is underneath about 5 kilometers of sediment. So the anomalies from the ship at any rate are 7 to 9 kilometers down. Out here in the North Pacific at any rate, these are very familiar with anomalies. They're early tertiary ones, mid-tertiary ones, and the anomalies are about 5 kilometers down to where you can get into them. But here they're very deep, but they're still very bold. So Dan's feeling was that the anomalies are of unknown age, but likely maybe early tertiary. They're certainly not during the quiet zone or Cretaceous age, and they're very bold and very morb-like. So that was also not typical of the Western Pacific back arc basin spreading anomaly systems. But what is similar, and this is really fun, although the IBM and Illusion back arc basin systems differ in their geomorphology and spreading patterns, their start of arc growth in the early Eocene is similar. Now, these here in the eastern Philippine Sea, a lot of drilling in here, a lot of very good information, Mark Reagan and others, and forearc basalts date in at around 52 to 50 MA, and then up you go as you get these samples. Recently, the Kahela and others at Gayamar at any rate did some dredging on the outer part of the Illusion Ridge and getting into early basalts that are exposed in the canyons and right along the forearc here of about 49 to 48. So 49 and 48 for the early initiation of arc volcanism for the Illusions, and a little bit earlier for the Philippine Sea area. My point is that they're similar. And we have got a ways to go because we are dealing here with the minimum initiations of arc growth as described by Bazard and others. 49 to 48, it could easily be this. With respect to that, here is a histogram of the distribution of ages for the Illusion Ridge, all that have been dated. And Bizarre published this here just recently in Lithos. This is the major area of organized volcanic arc growth of the Illusion Ridge, here basically in the Oligocene and into the Middle Eocene. But some early dates out through here turned out around 55 or so, 57. But they're big air bars on this. And so it's not considered to be valid, but maybe the ages of the growth of the Illusion Ridge will end up being very, very similar to what we see in the Eastern Philippines. This to be determined, but the point here is very similar in ages. Now let's go, the Illusion Arc formed, in close company, really, with other Pacific Rim back arc systems, marginal seas, and also the Hawaiian Emperor Bend. And the best dating that I can find on the bend is roughly 47 MA. And all of these numbers, because there are uncertainties in some of the dating, are very, very similar, including in the Solomons and Vanuatu. I couldn't convince myself I could really get better ages than just saying it's Eocene, probably early Eocene. But Tonga Kermadec, again, by the Gaomar folks at InterRidge, are coming in at 48 to 52 IBM. Lucian's a little bit young, but it's minimum. And here's the bend. So I just wanted to put this out there. A great deal of tectonic stuff was going on in the Western Pacific in the very early part of the East. I'll get back to this in a bit. Okay, let's go back. The origin of the Illusion Ridge and arc, I want to considering its structural framework, its rock framework, and tectonic and geologic. So where is this place that seems to be atypical? There is the Bering Sea Basin. This is the Illusion Basin part of that. If we look at the oblique convergence that's underway in the North Pacific, and this has been this way at least since the Bend time, it has fragmented the arc into blocks that are 200, 250 kilometers wide. There are continental thickness, 35, 40 kilometers in thickness. The arc massif into rotating westward translating blocks and arc slivers. GPS data allow us to track these movements in through here, and all the way out here on the Russian side of the Aleutian system and the Komandursky Islands, and they are moving at about half the speed of the Pacific Plate going towards the Kamchatka Trench. This is a model by a guy some years ago, rotating blocks, splinters, and slivers, and this is the latest and best bathymetric map that we have on the Illusion Ridge, all based upon real soundings. This is not gravity data, but based upon real soundings. You can see the blocks as they break open here. The GPS indicates they're moving this way westward. Zimmerman and others have recently published this material. So we have a lot of the arc being torn up, but it's a very wide arc and a very thick arc. So the lateral structural continuity of the Illusion Ridge is fragmented, for sure, by normal, strike slip, and counterclockwise rotating blocks. And the speed of all of this going on is increasingly so to the west. You draw cross sections across the arc, you can see as you go to the west, it gets thinner and thinner and thinner as you get into more and more of these arc slivers, more and more into this model. This is a cross section right down through the center of the arc. You can see the breakup of the blocks, and they get deeper. Oh, I didn't do that right. They get deeper and deeper and deeper. And finally, out here at Kamchatka Pass, they're 4,000 meters deep when we're getting a very, very deep pass. And next is Kamchatka. And large parts of the Illusion Arc very well may have been subducted beneath Kamchatka by this time at any rate. So let's take a look at this. And here's my statement about this. Although the Illusion Arc massif, it's fragmented by plate boundary driven extension, strike slip, and rotating block tear faulting, the arc sort of continuum of Eocene and younger rock ages appears to be intact. In other words, the arc has been pulled apart laterally at any rate, but it seems like all the things are there that make up an arc system. Here, for example, in Adak Island, the blue is material that gets you back into about 33, 34 MA. And then there are intrusive bodies in there. These are granodiorites, things of that sort. And they young as you go northward back towards the Bering Sea. These are volcanic arc systems. This seems to be, I think, what Mark Reagan and Bob Stern would call fore-arc basalt before the arc system really developed. But you can see the size of this. It's very wide, 260 kilometers, 30 to 35 kilometers thick. And it appears is to be really almost a sliver of continental crust in its size. And some continental crustal material, in fact, is being erupted way out on the western side. So at any rate, it looks like everything is here. The arc doesn't, there's no information that there was from this information, that there was a rifting system that somewhere put a remnant arc, which might have some of the older material. So Bowers Ridge, interesting. What is this guy? It just comes out here. This is something that might be considered a remnant arc of some sort. Here's Shearshoff Ridge. Bowers Ridge, we got good age, argon ages now. They've been dredged and also drilled from the arc at any rate, summarized in Bizarre at any rate. And here they are here. And the ages of the Bowers Ridge and its formation really matches the really very, very prominent growth of arc systems, the arc volcanic systems here in the early Oligocene into the middle Oligocene. That's Bowers Ridge. It appears to be very much part of the Illusion system, not bizarre, not weird, not peculiar. Shearshoff Ridge, I have to depend upon Soviet information here. Late Cretaceous chert, mid-ocean ridge, similar amphibolites with metamorphic ages of 47. Got this from Zhukov, 2011. It also doesn't show anything similar to the Illusion Ridge. Bowers Ridge does. I'm going to go back and just say, we're talking about this time in the early Eocene, 47, 52, major tectonic changes occurring in the Western Pacific. We've seen this slide before, but up here as well. The Illusion seems to be involved in what is going on. Now, just before or as the Illusion subduction zone and arc formed, major rotations of the Pacific Kulu and Pacific Farallon spreading centers occurred at around Cron 24, 56 MA. And you can see this here, and you can see this here. Here is the Kula Pacific rotating, and here's the Pacific Farallon rotating. So anomaly 24, just before apparently the Illusion Ridge formed, we had this tearing up of North Pacific plate boundary systems. And looking down at it from the North Pole, looking straight down at any rate, before about 50 or 55 MA, Pacific plate here, Farallon plate there, Resurrection plate there is defined. The Kula is a Nagi plate over through here. And we have no Illusion Ridge here as far as we know. It could be it was there, but we don't know that for sure. But by 45 or 50, we do have an Illusion Ridge. Pacific plate now is totally up in through here. Farallon plate is there. We have a new back arc basin and new arc system. So what happened in this time was the Resurrection plate here was subducted beneath Western Canada. The Kula Izanagi plate was captured by the Pacific plate. Parts and pieces of it, fragments would be out there. But this is where we went, from there to there at this early Eocene time. Going back and taking a look at something here, geologic setting. In the early Eocene, say around 50 MA, somewhere in there, the creation of the Illusion Bering Sea region, or however problematically it got created, it blocked off cordoned off the former northwest corner of the Pacific Basin. That's an argument. In other words, here is the old continental margin. The arc forms. This forms later, unknown about the shear shelf as well. But in doing that, at any rate, it just cordons off this part of the Pacific Basin, however that arc forms. Now the question, with respect to Western Pacific back arc basin systems, why is the Illusion bearing back arc system so physically and magnetically atypical, different, if you want to look at it that way? There is really quite different. So why can that be? A couple of ideas have come forward on this. And these are just some cartoons. One idea is that the back arc basin has captured Pacific crust. And that was initially announced by Shore in 1964. I added a little bit of stuff to it later. The back arc basin, though, could also be formed by margin rifting and back arc spreading, as this diagram shows here. This is something that is a possibility, and this is the other part. These are sort of end members. There are all sorts of flavors of this, but these seems to be the end members. One, that it's an old piece of the Pacific plate. The other is that it's back arc spreading in some sort of a Carrig fashion. Okay, if we look at Japan, back arc basin system was created by, rifting of the Asian continental margin, and the diagnostic evidence of this is the Asian continental crust of Japan and blocks like the Yamato Ridge of continental crust in the back arc basin. So this has got fragments of continental crust from Asia there, and so we have out here through here. So this is rifting, pulling apart parts and pieces, and this is the evidence that you have to have, is that you've got continental crust out in the arc systems that are in the back arc basin. We look in the Bering Sea, cross sections here and here. We have dredged these margins, and what you get there are shallow water, Jurassic and late Cretaceous material, very submerged right at the moment, and industry drilling is run into coal beds sitting down here on top of the basement. So it's a Mesozoic and older basement, shallow water coal beds here, non-marine, and down through here, shallow water deposits, which are very common in Western Alaska. But none of this material occurs on Shearshoff or on Bowers Ridge. So there isn't any real physical evidence that Bowers or Shearshoff or the Illusion Ridge is really rifted continental margin. So the atypical Illusion back arc basin system did not form by continental edge rifting and back arc spreading, because as far as known, Alaska continental crust does not occur on Bowers, Shearshoff, or the Illusion Ridge. In other words, they're different material entirely, nothing that comes from Alaska. So evidence that capture of the Pacific crust by the North American plate created the back arc basin. So I just sort of, whited this out here. Let's go over here. The back arc crust is captured Pacific crust. The original idea on this comes from George Shore, not so much the capture idea, but let me show you what George was talking about back in '64. George did some refraction shooting in the Bering Sea, in the Illusion Basin. He'd been out here in the Pacific as well, published in 1964. This is before plate tectonics. And George's thinking was that the refraction velocity structure of the Illusion Basin was really not much different than from the Pacific, and that somehow this ridge grew here and blocked it off, and then a lot of mud got stacked up back in through here. That this was really a piece of the old northwesternmost corner of the Pacific Basin. You can put a plate tectonic flavor on this and simply say, well, what happened was that the Illusion Arc and, oops, let me get back here again. The Illusion Arc and Trench extended this way in the late Eocene, isolating the Illusion Basin. So that's merely a plate tectonic setting for what George Shore said was the situation, that this is old Pacific crust And this is just a way that you can get it. So how do you do that? Sort of make another cartoon would be that in the late Mesozoic, early Eocene, this was the the edge of North American plate all the way around through here. The arc system develops here in the late Eocene and comes across and isolates it back in through here. And it would be something like this. This would be the Illusion Basin, former northwest crust corner of the Pacific Basin. This is a abandoned Mesozoic, Cenozoic subduction zone. There's a big arc system that's jammed in there. And this is sort of what it says happened, that the corner of the North Pacific just got cordoned off, and a piece of the Pacific crust is back in through there. So this is the take-home argument, that in the early Eocene, here at Unimak Pass, right here, the Alaska subduction zone, which goes back at least to the Triassic, extended westward across the North Pacific. And in doing so, it captured a large segment of oceanic crust, then occupying this corner of the Pacific Basin. It's probably maybe a piece of the cooler plate. It doesn't have to be. It's acknowledging it could be other things. The atypical Aleutian back arc system then is formed. Oh, I didn't do that right. So how do we do that? This is just one idea. How do we capture north-south trending magnetic anomalies in the back arc Illusion Basin? Well, here's just one way. When the cooler plate formed at about 85 MA, tracks of older existing north-south trending anomalies were included inside the newly captured plate. Cooler plate forms here at 85, and it's got a bunch of older plate system up there. And you can just imagine that you had some north-south anomalies on that. When the Illusion Basin forms, when the Illusion Arc forms at any rate, it simply grabs a piece of that. So that's just a way to go about doing that. So there's two captures here. The cooler plate captures some north-south anomalies. The Aleutian system forms and captures those north-south anomalies back in the basin there. Okay, now we attempted to test this model. These are the magnetic anomalies here. Farnella is a high seamount that we could drill. We proposed to drill the seamount. We wanted to get the age. This is the buried piece of basement crust here. We wanted to get the paleolatitude of its formation. Our proposal was not accepted, so it didn't happen. But we wanted to test whether or not there was, in fact, this is all back arc basin crust, or it is more crust that goes trapped up there. We needed age information and paleolatitude of formation. That's what we needed. So anyway, thanks for listening. This was my argument. It's the old Aleutian Basin is old Pacific Basin is the Pacific Basin crust is in there. That makes that atypical. The typical basin is what Dan Carey talked about a long time ago, where you've got back arc rifting and spreading and migrating seaward. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your attention. And I'm done.